Good morning and welcome. How's the sound down here? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm looking at David Beach, who's going. All right. We have journeyed through the wilderness during the season of Lent, and we have now arrived on the day that our tradition calls Palm Sunday. I think that when we gather for sacred practice within this tradition, we try and kind of span time and space. So we are members of the human race who, for eons, have asked the question, is there more than us? And again, if there is more than us, is this thing that's bigger than us, is this love? Is this power? Where do we make our home and nurture our heart in this world today? And I think those questions are consistently asked by our ancestors in this tradition. And I don't think it was ever a question of, oh, are we getting to heaven? Whew. But in fact, our teacher tells us, this kingdom that you seek, it's in your midst. It's there for the taking. It's there if you choose to enter it. And in this kingdom, we gather around this table, and we live in friendship and in peace. And I think that's the vision that we gather to claim again and again, regardless of what is happening in our world. And I think more importantly, today, in 2026, we need to claim that vision, wrap ourselves in that vision, be inspired by that vision, and find sanctuary in that vision. Because the alternative is falling off the edge with fear and anxiety, and then what story to become part of at that time? So I think the invitation of our tradition always, every day is, what are the practices? What are the stories? Who are the ancients? What are the traditions that are going to serve as a doorway so that in this world of madness, sometimes, we provide or represent a parable or an alternative, not just for us, but for the entire creation community. So I invite you to enter this sacred space and these sacred conversations with a commitment to leaning once again into this ancient vision of peace. Let us pray. Holy One, here we stand on the cusp of Holy Week, and yet it has been another week of holy hell on earth. Bombs drop, drones demolish. The innocent die, hunger grows, prices rise, homelessness escalates, and the battle between perseverance and despair exhausts. It has been another week of holy hell on earth. Temperatures rise, species disappear, and money talks. Come, Holy One, who carries every hell in your heart and takes every step with the despairing and knows well the futility and wretchedness of violence. Come, holy breath, and restore our weary hearts with a wisdom that is greater than ours, with a love that is deeper than ours, with a forgiveness that is wider than ours. For such are the signs of your kingdom. Amen. The hymn is on the screen. Can you put it up? Hey, Mary Kay. Oh, thanks. So I guess the other place that I am a broken record is, apart from the big question, what time is it, is the question about what is really going on, what is at the heart of this story. And just in as aside, some of you are familiar with the work of Karen Armstrong, who at one point was a nun and in the nunnery, until she kind of made her way out because she felt called to a bigger conversation. And she went on to be, well, she was a real student of all the world's religions. And she wrote a very significant book years and years ago called The Battle for God. I don't have to explain what that book might be about, do I? Right? And in it, she really addressed fundamentalism within Christianity, within Judaism, within Islam, as embracing one story about God and one understanding about power and how they were allowed to use power and how God used power, vis-a-vis, well, is that really the true story about this ancient mystery? So I think, I could be wrong, but I think that Palm Sunday is one of those days where we need to really take a closer look to see what is going on. And I will confess I'm drawing from the work of John Dominic Crossan for this, who's an incredibly a student of ancient texts, ancient history, ancient sociology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and this lovely little Irishman who's a little bit like a leprechaun and just has a wonderful sense of humor. So Palm Sunday wasn't a parade, it was a protest. So it's very interesting as I'm thinking through what unfolded on this week. And I can tell you, having grown up in the church, that traditionally, the first song that we all sang on Palm Sunday was, Hosanna, loud Hosanna, the little children sing. It was a lovely song about this lovely parade. It was kind of like the parade before the Easter parade, except instead of eggs, you get palm branches, right? That's not really what happened. And I think it really distorts, in fact, what happened. In fact, this image also distorts what happened. But it's a beginning to opening the door of the story that unfolded in that week that we call Holy Week. That's a lot bigger than Jesus riding into town on a donkey, all right? So I'm just gonna kind of share different elements of the story that I think if we get those elements, it's really important we get those elements, and then, and once we get the elements, let me suggest there wouldn't have been a child on the street. All right. So first of all, can I just say that how this story unfolds is an old story? Like, it had unfolded many times before, and it's unfolded many times since. But boy, does this story ever speak to the archetype of a collision of different kinds of power. But what is the context? And I think we need to recognize that by and large, the context of the Gospels, and even much of the stories within the Old Testament, is a context of occupation. Now, I don't think anyone in the room has lived in a country under occupation. Maybe, maybe not. All right. It's Judea, and this is a country that's occupied by Rome. Basically, almost the entire continent became to be occupied by Rome. But let me just give you a little taste from my personal experience of spending the summer of 1990 in El Salvador as part of a protective presence program. El Salvador was an occupied country. Now, it was occupied by its own power, 13 families who had all the power and wanted to maintain that power, and were in collusion with the American empire to contain that power, because Lord forbid that we give power to the people and then the 13 families lose most of their power and their means. And so on every street corner in San Salvador was a soldier with a machine gun. And passing by a soldier with a machine gun kind of does something to you. I mean, we all know what it's like to be followed by that black car and suddenly the lights go on top, right? And whether we were speeding or not, it's suddenly, we're afraid. All right, so kind of imagine that on steroids. And just to talk about the way that power was managed in that just little small country of El Salvador, I was coached that when I was on my way down there and when I was going through customs, and I was asked, why was I coming to El Salvador? This was the right answer. I was going to teach Sunday school at a Pentecostal church. That was safe. The government thought Pentecostal churches were safe because Pentecostal churches basically just said to their people, you stay in your place is ordained by God, stop complaining, yes, your lives are miserable, but you're all going to go to heaven. No danger to the government. I was actually going to be in a kind of accompanying presence with a very different church that had a medical program, a school program, a farmers cooperative, sewing cooperative, and therefore were considered terrorists by the state. So you can imagine being told, I'm a really bad liar, kind of like, okay, please don't ask, please don't ask, because it's going to be a lie, and then you're going to know that I'm not here for that reason. They didn't end up asking. Anyway, I'm just trying to give you the sense of the power of living under occupation. So here we are. It is the time of Passover in Jerusalem. And for the time of Passover, Jerusalem, which was a city of 50,000 people, very often expanded to twice that much. Why? Because pilgrims were coming from throughout the region for this Passover festival. And what was the Passover festival about? It was the annual celebration of the liberation of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. So it was like this festival where we're going to throw off being enslaved and we're going to be free and well, that's a lovely idea. And then again, coming with this deep yearning, please free us again. So when John Dominic Crossan talks about what the temperature was in Jerusalem during the time of Passover, it was a tinderbox, because there's one more piece here, and that is that, and this is where we're not getting the entire story when we read only the events that unfold in Mark 11, because we're not getting the backdrop. So Rome, had appointed a governor of Judea, and his name was Pontius Pilate. And knowing that during Passover, these Jewish people, just a little bit afraid that they may think that this whole Passover ritual means that, well, God is going to claim them again, or they're going to storm the Bastille or whatever, because in their deepest of longings is a longing to be free from the oversight of the empire. So on the day that Mark tells us that Jesus is bringing a colt into the city of Jerusalem, coming from the west is Pilate with his legion of 600 soldiers, just to kind of show up and say, you can have your little festival and you can celebrate God's power and liberating might, but don't forget who's in charge. And if we see any signs to the contrary. Right. So again, streets of San Salvador, soldier of machine gun on every corner. Like, imagine Pilate, horses, swords, armor, 600 Roman soldiers. I mean, you can barely comprehend, right? So do you agree there may not have been any children on the streets? It was a very dangerous place to be. And here's where this picture is not quite right. And again, from the wisdom of Dominic Crossan, who's just looking at history and going, look, can we go back to the story and see what's going on? That's a crowd. And how interesting that this conversation is taking place the day after the Third No Kings March in the United States. What Dominic Crossan said is, given the context of anxiety and potential explosion of violence at any time, he said, how many people do you think were in that crowd following Jesus on a colt? Like, if everybody knows that there are soldiers here, there, and everywhere, and there's an entire group of 6, how many people were in the crowd? And he just said, maybe 12 to 15, because any more than that, and we know what would have happened. Like, so again, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork to speaking to what this, I would say, protest, yes, not quite. Parable, I think, maybe. So let's keep going here. So before I read from Mark, one more piece that's important to understand historically, right? Because these stories are layer upon stories. So I think, again, if you look within the Old Testament, you will find this little thread that's just going, oh, how long, oh God, do we need to live under the thumb of the empire? That's one question. Because in that context, there was never peace. And certainly, if it was peace, it was a tinderbox peace, so it wasn't peace with justice. And then there's another question that weaves its way through our sacred text, and that is, what does it mean in this world to be God's people? All right? So I'm going to suggest that there are 2 pieces of scripture that are quoted in this story of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and we need to understand what's at the heart of them, because it's those 2 stories that then fuel the entrance into Jerusalem. So the first one is, let's go. This whole concept of riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, where does that come from? It actually comes from the book of Isaiah, where, again, so much of this is poetry that's trying to create a vision that the people can depend on and have hope in. And the vision within Judaism is, please, please, please say that we're going to get a ruler who's going to rule with peace and justice and fairness. That was just always the ancient longing that then got turned into a longing for Messiah and then a whole bunch of theology, and we're not going to talk about that. So again, this sign of, and this Jesus deciding that he was going to step into and create a parable or a profession in support of this ancient question of how then shall we live together in peace? All right? So that's the first kind of Old Testament thread that is woven through the event of Palm Sunday. And the question is, how do we live now? We're always under empire. What's going on here? Why isn't better? Who's going to save us, etc. So the next quote comes, because I'm going to include reading Jesus going into the temple, has to do with, and we all remember, the line from Jesus Christ Superstar. My Father made this to be a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves. And there's a quote in that line where Jesus is actually quoting from Isaiah. What's going on in the story of Isaiah? The people of Israel have lived in exile, again, because the Babylonian emperor decided they wanted them there. Now, some of them have made their way home. The temple has been destroyed, and they are now looking at rebuilding their spiritual framework. And one of the questions that's being asked as they rebuild the temple was, who gets to belong? Like, does this need to be pure Judaism, or can we make room for friendships and a temple for all the peoples? And so this is a quote from Isaiah that, and there was always this back and forth. Who is God's people? It's the Pure Land, it's when we are with others, et cetera, et cetera. So those 2 essential questions. How do we function under this empirical power? And the second is, how do we create a spiritual architecture where all of us can belong together. All right. Thanks for bearing with the introduction. There's more stories. All right. So, Holy Week, and I'm going to go through it day by day. And it's interesting because John Dominic Crossan again says, we all call it it's been called in our tradition the triumphal entry. And he goes, there is nothing triumphal about that. The real triumphal entry was happening at the other gate, right? So, Jesus enacting this demonstration to raise again these two ancient longings. How are we going to live together in our empire? And how big is this spiritual community for us? Are both included in this reading. When they were approaching Jerusalem near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into a village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it in. If anyone says, why are you doing this? Just say, the Anointed One needs it, and we'll send it back here immediately. They went away and found a colt tied near the door outside the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, what are you doing untying a colt? They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it. And he sat on it, and many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And then those who went ahead were those who were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. So that, again, we can only understand what is at the heart of that story when we look at it historically, and then when we look at it in the terms of the ecosystem that was Judea at that time. So Jesus is making a statement, nonviolent statement, speaking against imperial power. That was Sunday. Monday. On the following day, they came to Jerusalem. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, it is written, my house shall be a house of prayer for all the nations. But you have made it a den of robbers. It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread. The chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the festival. There may be a riot among the people. So this event on Monday that our tradition is called the cleansing of the temple didn't have anything to do with cleansing the temple. Again, it was another parable whereby Jesus was challenging conservative temple Judaism. Jesus was Jewish, remember? This is not about Christians and Jews. And I would also argue that we have to be so careful with these accounts of Holy Week to make the Jewish people the enemy. God, the church has done that forever. So it's another confrontation, though, with power. So the power of the temple, and I'm going to tell you, I get it. The power of the temple, so that the chief priests of the temple had a very fine, had to walk a very fine line. Why? Because they were under the thumb of the Romans and only existed because of their collusion with empire. And so if any sign that somebody was about to kind of maybe stimulate a bit of a riot or an uprising, well, they knew where it was going to go. Everybody knew where it was going to go. And historically, Rome said, you can have your religion as long as it's very personal and there are no implications for challenging our power. And any time in the 400 years, 200 before and 200 years after Jesus, when that was challenged to the point that in 70 AD, the whole temple was taken down. So that was a story that everybody was living under. And yet Jesus was also challenging that collusion, challenging getting in bed with the powers that be. can I say that I may have a little bit more sympathy for the leaders of the temple because they knew what they were up against when it came to Rome. And any sign of sedition was going to take them all down. And so the next day, later that week, it's very interesting. As Mark goes through the story, there's all this, we can't get Jesus arrested yet because there's a crowd. And if there's a crowd, then there's going to be a skirmish. And if there's going to be a skirmish, we're all going down. So then where does it end up going? Judas, who is a disciple of Jesus, goes and talks to the temple authorities and says, I think I can help you out here. And again, how do we think again about Judas? He was always the bad guy. But scholarship would indicate that he, too, may have been afraid of where the leadership of Jesus was going to take the Jewish people. So again, nothing's black and white, and there's so many levels of domination on the one hand and fear on the other. How do you even begin to work it out? Except we can see that, can't we? And so Jesus says to the temple authorities, I can get you Jesus away from the crowd, and then there won't be any big deal. Nobody needs to see it. Nobody kind of screaming, raging. No attention from Rome. So Jesus knew what he was walking into. He was well aware of the tinderbox that was people's daily lives, specifically around the time of Passover. And yet he was committed to walking into these places and exhibiting and participating and illustrating another way, another story, and in particular, a very different way to understand the presence of God, which was not going to come through the gates on the other side with an army. Although that was kind of always the longing of the people. Really, we just want a leader like God who's going to be as violent as these guys, but will win. And yet again and again, the prophets, the teachers in this tradition, and Jesus in particular went, no, if it's violence, it's not God. So Jesus came as a servant. So, here we are, Palm Sunday, 2026. And we are now, all of us, living under the cloud of the decisions of the empire. Yes? The American empire. We are living under the cloud of those decisions, as is the whole world. And yet, much of the world has always lived under the abusive power of empire. Look at South and Central America. Look at Africa. Like we won the lottery, right? Eastern Europe. And it just keeps circling around. And we know, of course, that the Church of Christendom, like the temple authorities, colluded with the empire in order to maintain their power. And presently, throughout the world, fundamentalist leaders in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam continue to collude with empire or seek to establish their own versions of empire with abusive, coercive power. I don't want to even tell you what Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, said last week. It's beyond belief. So at this stage of the game, in a Palm Sunday service, I would then be sharing with you stories of people who, within the tradition of Jesus, made very courageous, intentional, bold decisions to confront the empire with nonviolence. And we can all name a few, can't we? We can name Gandhi. We can name Martin Luther King. We can name Oscar Romero. But I thought, it's great to have these religious heroes. It's great to have these saints. But I think we need a lot more than that today. And I think it also then, it avoids the question, but what about us? So I'm going to share with you a different story. So this comes from an article written by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times on March 12th of this year. And he calls it this: Why Minnesota Matters More Than Iran for America's Future. Why Minnesota matters. Okay, I'll put it on the wrong syllable. Why Minnesota matters more than Iran for America's future. And here's a précis of what he wrote. In his article, he describes a spontaneous uprising of everyday civic courage in Minneapolis, where ordinary citizens quietly resisted ICE enforcement by caring for vulnerable neighbors, driving children to school, buying groceries, sharing resources, and protecting local workers and businesses who were living in fear. And his conclusion was this movement, leaderless, but grounded in the ethic, I am my neighbor's keeper, rippled across race and class and belief. And his final conclusion, because I heard him interviewed by somebody, was that our future depends on rediscovering our need for interdependence. We rise together, or we fall together. So, just a couple of examples about the role that the church is playing here and around the world in this new season. I will remind you of Bishop Marion Boudet, who from the Washington Cathedral invited Trump to be merciful the day after his inauguration. Earlier this week, the Anglican Communion, which is massive worldwide, ordained their first female archbishop. Sarah Mullally, age 62, started out as a hospice nurse. And already, because of the common mind that she's trying to move the Anglican community in towards, has gotten so much flack. The Pope suggesting to Pete Hegseth that it was completely inappropriate to use the word God in this same sentence that he used the word war. So, it's Palm Sunday, 2026. Now what? Or maybe, so what? So again, I thought about the world that we're trying to navigate right now, and the mental health that we're trying to navigate, and the fear and anxiety that we're trying to navigate. And I came across the story of Jane Goodall again this week. And more specifically, I came across the text of a letter that she had written to the world before she died for the purpose of it being shared with the world. And I thought, I think her words are the words that we need to hear on Palm Sunday, 2026. So during this time for reflection, I'm going to have just a small PowerPoint with some of her words just to sit in. And because more than anything right now, we need encouragement and hope. And yet not a Candyman encouragement and hope, but words coming from somebody. I mean, all you have to do is say Jane Goodall. I think I've seen her interview a couple of times, but there's just this ethos of authenticity and grace and peace. And yet the work that she did in this world, some might have called her a warrior. I don't think that's the right word, is it? Again, investing in this vision, this ancient vision for the well-being of the human community. So. Why don't we remain seated while we sing this hymn by Teresa of Avila, who lived through the plague and still discovered that place within her that she felt was connected to this deep well of love and peace and mercy that some have called God. Yeah. And we'll sing it 3 times. It's in English, once in Spanish, and then again in English. All right? A number of announcements. Our partnership with the Prince Edward County Lions Club begins tomorrow with Soups On. I just see all of the stories colliding. That the story of Holy Week also includes a story of Jesus bending down and washing his disciples' feet and saying, go and serve one another. So, thank you to those of you who are providing leadership and participating in this way of serving one another. And David, Jacob, did you want to say anything?
No, I think everything's in place. You are most welcome to come and have a bowl of soup. We have a great group of volunteers that are here tomorrow. So if you're free at 11:30 and you want a bowl of soup for lunch, you're welcome to come. And we'll see you then. Thank you.
Did you get your cookies?